Over the past several years, Packer fans have had three major gripes about this organization. Three. Number one, Dom Capers being washed up as a defensive coordinator. Well, he's been gone now, finally. You can rejoice in that fact. Number two, Mike McCarthy. The game maybe kind of passed him by a little bit. Him and Aaron Rodgers weren't clicking on the same wavelength. His offensive game plan sucked. Da-da-da-da-da. Time for him to go. He's now gone. The third and perhaps even most pronounced gripe amongst Packer fans over recent years, especially under Ted Thompson, was this team's complete aversion, if not allergy, to investing money in free agency. Now, look, I totally understood the concept of wanting to build and draft and develop your own team on a variety of different levels. That makes sense. But at some point in time, you have to be wise enough to understand that it is damn near impossible to completely and totally draft a championship team. You utilize things like the trade market and free agency to plug in gaps, fill voids on the roster, bring in some new blood, some fresh life, some fresh perspective, some fresh talent, all of these different things. And yet Ted Thompson, year after year after year after year, just flat out ignored to do that. And which is crazy to me as a Bears fan even, looking at the Packers' history during my lifetime. Their two real peak eras, in the mid-90s and in that late 2000s, 2010, you look at those two peak runs, you can talk about the young quarterbacks, first Brett Favre and then later on Aaron Rodgers, but in a lot of ways, those franchises were changed by big notable signings in free agency. Now, obviously, Reggie White before 92, that was otherworldly. It will always be one of the truly great free agent signings of all time on so many different levels. But Reggie White, as much as Brett Favre, was a franchise changer. And you go into, 2006, I don't know that we would classify quite Charles Woodson as the same level of game changer as a guy like a Reggie White. But Charles Woodson was a revelation for the Green Bay Packers. A guy that had a surly attitude. He was damn near getting his way out of the league. Didn't really have many options out there. Didn't want to be in Green Bay. Hadn't played that well the past couple of seasons before free agency, being cut, whatever. Here he comes to Green Bay, and Charles Woodson is the man. Defensive player of the year type of guy. Franchise player on the defensive side of the ball. And these were guys that were both acquired via free agency. So you would think at some point in time, you don't want to waste the rest of Aaron Rodgers' career with inferior talent. You have to be a little bit more aggressive when you have a guy like Aaron Rodgers in the fold. You have to be a little bit more aggressive when you have a guy like Aaron Rodgers dwindling away the peak of his career for your organization. And as a result, you would think that would encourage a front office to be more aggressive, and Ted Thompson just wasn't. So I get it. Packer fans were frustrated about it. Last year under Gut Kunstauer, what the hell you say his name, and he went out there, Muhammad Wilkerson, Jimmy Graham, spent a little bit of money, but still wasn't exactly changing the world. Making a small adjustment, being a little more aggressive, but not much, but it was still something. But you can forget all about that crap now, because the Packers this year went out in free agency, and they spent big. Are you happy now, cheeseheads? Preston Smith, Zadarius Smith, they got themselves a couple of big young edge rushers on the open market. I'm assuming that means you can wave bye-bye to Clay Matthews once and for all. You bring them in to team them up with Kyler Fackrell, and you would hope your pass rush would be a lot better. And then, in theory, you weaken your divisional rival at least a little bit by bringing in Adrian Amos to be your in-the-box safety. You look at this team for so many years failing to spend big money in free agency and avoiding it like the plague. All of a sudden, they're passing it out like fucking crazy. You got Preston Smith. What did he get? 4 years, $52 million, and $27.5 guaranteed the first 2 years. All that for a guy that had 4 sacks last year. I know sacks aren't the only measure of a pass rusher's effectiveness, but just trying to make an easy quantification of a guy. Zadarius Smith of the Ravens. 4 years, $66 million total deal, $34.5 million guaranteed in the first 2 years. So we're now at a point in time where guys are getting over $17 million a year because they're an edge rusher who gets 8.5 sacks. Paying elite money to less than elite talent. Again, understand, as the years go on in the NFL, this kind of crap happens, but this can also get kind of foolish too. And you look at Adrian Amos, and a lot of people are going to talk about, well, this deal didn't happen in day one, it happened in day two. And you look at the financials, 4 years, $37 million, $21 million guaranteed over the first 2 years. That's really not that bad of a deal. From a salary cap standpoint, it's not that terrible, I grant you. But from a Packers standpoint, I would ask this important question. If Adrian Amos was so good and so valuable, why did the Chicago Bears allow him to walk? All the while, they're creating a bunch of cap space by restructuring guys like Khalil Mack, Eddie Goldman, and others. It's an important question to ask, isn't it? They clearly could have, if they had the appetite to, found a way to keep Adrian Amos, and they chose not to. And then you look at the Denver Broncos, whose new head coach is the Bears' old defensive coordinator in Vic Fangio. When you look at the deal that Adrian Amos got, why wouldn't the Broncos have wanted to bring in somebody familiar with Fangio and his system to Denver? It's an important question to ask. Now, granted, he did not nearly massively overpay for an in-the-box safety as much as the Washington Redskins did for Landon Collins, but the reality is that Adrian Amos is an okay player, but incredibly overrated from an analytics standpoint. And that's just a fact, and a lot of Bears fans know that. A lot of Bears fans will reference him as perhaps being the 10th best starter on an 11-man defense, and that's not exactly inaccurate. So for the 10th best player on an elite defensive unit, the Packers gave him $21 million over the first 2 years. So what you've got is the Packers spending money in free agency, spending big money in free agency for non-elite guys. Sometimes be careful what you wish for, Packers fans, because when you get it, then you'll realize maybe you didn't want it after all, and now you'll be griping about it, which I'm sure most certainly a lot of you are via the interwebs. Now, these are not franchise paralyzing type of moves, especially with all that guaranteed money tied up in the first 2 years. So in a couple of years, you have the potential to move on from some, if not all of these guys, if you so desire. And I will say Preston Smith is a solid player. Zadarius Smith is a pretty good player. Adrian Amos is a solid to above solid player. So these are not guys that are likely to bust. These are not guys that are likely to totally suck. But these are not necessarily guys that I would expect to live up to the massive contracts that they were given. Again, if Adrian Amos was so special, he would have more than a sack and a fumble recovery and 2 INTs in 2018. I'm just effing saying. But if nothing else, from a philosophical standpoint, this represents a change for the Green Bay Packers and a necessary and vital change for the Green Bay Packers. Fully moving on from that old Ted Thompson philosophy that had been pounded into the organizational infrastructure for a decade plus. Now, you can gripe about the players they added. You can gripe about the money they spent on the players that they added, and that's all valid and legitimate. But you could at least maybe make the argument or have the belief that the Green Bay Packers today are a little bit better based off of the moves that they made in free agency. How much better remains to be seen. Was this the right way to spend this much money? Remains to be seen. But at least they went out there and they tried. And I know that in the grand scheme of things, you don't award Lombardi trophies based off of trying and effort. But for the Packers, it represents something and it means something. It's a way for them to address some needs that they had on the defensive side of the ball, which opens up their options in the upcoming draft in April and what they could do with those 2 first-round picks. They may not be done spending money. I know they also added Billy Turner, who gives them another offensive lineman that they can move around in different places. This team needed to do something different, and they did something different. Whether it pays off or not, Packers fans, like I said, remains to be seen. But you should at least be happy with the fact that your new general manager at least tried to go out and spend some damn money in the open market for a change.